Hey guys, so in this video we're going to go over three different things I'm going to gloss over. I've already prepared some levels here of the progress I've made on my level so far. First thing we're going to go over is a preview of my level that I've built, showing you some of the innovative ways you can use some of the props I've included. Then we're going to go over some light baking tips, and finally I'll show you some of the particle systems I've created for the video. So the first thing I want to show you is basically some of the design techniques I've used for my level here. If you'll notice here, let me just bring up light mapping window. I have it set on some kind of weird filter. There we go. Let me get that out of there. You'll notice that I've actually made a ramp part of the level, and I achieved this just by rotating the floor pieces by 15 or so degrees. And you'll notice that in my hierarchy I have a whole object dedicated just to hall slant. And to make the walls, yeah, I just made the actual wall too, and notice the irregular shape. That's fine if some of the pieces clip out of the level because the viewer's never going to see them. As far as they know, this hall was designed for use for a downward slope here. So that's one of the little techniques I've used there. The next thing, let's jump over to this large room. There's a few things here. I use the flat floor just to create this basic large scale flat floor. I've used wall 2 to kind of build them up, just basically making like a industrial kind of storage room. I've included the pipe prop and scaled them up to create kind of like a pipeworks room. And here you see I have barrels and whatnot everywhere. It's important to note that whenever you are starting to dress your level, well, I'll get that in a second when I go over some of the props. And here for the center room, I kind of just made like this circular little hallway here, and at this little threshold I've made a double-sided door with the frame and the doors slanted to merely make it look like this place has seen an earthquake or some kind of disaster or whatnot. So to make this little center room, I basically took a regular flat floor piece, and then to fit my floor inside the circular area, I had to scale, or actually I didn't scale. Actually, I just kind of made a 4-quadrant floor piece, and I just nestled it right here. See how they're not exactly lining up? This is the corner of that floor piece, and this is the corner of that one. Well, I just kind of moved them in and made them work so that I could fit my little center room in here logically, like so. And as far as all the props and everything, I'm going to go over a few things in regards to that. The first thing you'll notice is some parts like the rubble I have strewn everywhere, and the pipes here. If you look at my scaling values, I've really scaled those up, and you'll notice I have parts of props just kind of clipping through the level. You know, work with what you got with props. Be as imaginative as possible. You know, this pipe's going into that one and creates this column. Really, I wanted to create something interesting in every kind of corner of the room. Here you'll see with some broken pipes. Here I've made like a little barrel area, and just add a little bit of asymmetry. I've kind of thrown a barrel over here. It's all about making the room as interesting as possible while using the limited assets I've given you. Some of you have asked about, or you may want to include some of your own assets in here. I'm going to challenge you not to, just so you can, you know, work within a limited set, so it kind of challenges your creativity and whatnot. And you'll also notice, let's say we're making this pipe here. I didn't do a mesh collider. I did a regular box collider, and if you'll notice, the box collider works just fine. This green little box right here. If I go to the pipe right here, let's remove this component here. Let's say you're setting up your pipe prefab for the first time, and in my prefabs folder down here I've got like a base prefab where this is like the base environment area. I've even included in my hierarchy just environment base. So if I ever needed to just hide that, I can go into my inspector, and now I'm just left with my pipes. See, it has this little checkbox for visibility. So I can basically start it out by making just my hallways and my rooms, and after that was done, I made a group just for props, so you can turn those on and off. So without the props, you just see the base level. So that's something cool you can do the inspector. So if you were making your pipe prefab for the first time, make sure that whenever you're making your pipe prefab, right here. If I'll go into it, you'll notice that my pipe prefab doesn't have a mesh collider on it right now. So if you get in there and you're throwing around your pipe prefabs and you realize, oh wait, I forgot to do a collider, you can just go into your prefab folder, select the actual model here, you can see the material information. We can go to add component, go to physics, and we can just select a box collider, and there we have it. Now everything in my scene has a box collider now. And if it doesn't go all the way through, yep, it looks like it should be applied. There we go. Everything looks applied. So there, that's a quick way to throw in a collider. The obvious solution would have been, as you're making your prefab for the first time, just to go ahead and throw that box collider on there. Let's go over some of the colliders I've used for different shapes of objects. If I select a barrel here, notice that it highlights it in my outliner. For this barrel, I used a simple Capsule Collider. A box collider would have given you weird, rough edges. And if you wanted to turn this thing into a rigid body to have it bounce, the box collider might have given it a weird kind of bounce. It might have bounced on an imaginary edge up here or whatnot. So, you know, think about the kind of shapes the colliders have and the kind of shapes of the objects you're using. So a Capsule Collider works well for that. And for the rubble, I use a simple sphere collider. You see this green box going around with the sphere collider. Let me just highlight where this rubble is. And don't be afraid if you get in and you find that, let's see. Yeah, I must have attached the collider to the game object itself. Maybe it doesn't really matter, I guess. Maybe smartly I probably should have put the collider on the actual rubble here. But I put it on the game object itself, the prefab object itself. Either way, it still gives you the collision, and either way you're still going to move this prefab like it was the whole object, so the collider moves with it. And just a quick little thing here, with any of the colliders here, you're going to have some transformation properties. So if you find that you're scaling your rubble up or down, you might find that the collider is too big or too small. Well, if you can just click the radius here, you can drag and make the radius just as big as you want it for that collider for the rubble there. Notice how I don't have it, encompassing the whole thing. A collider like this will keep you just far back enough, even though it's not encompassing every little bit. It'll give you enough collision so you're not just passing through this piece of rubble here. And for the panels, just a simple box collider is great. For things like the papers on the floor, no collider needed. The last thing you want to do is be stumbling around on small little props like that. Same thing for this grate I put in between every door. I didn't put a collider on that because I don't want to get stuck on a little small flourish detail that, I was walking fine through it before. Why should I add any more colliders on there? As far as the colliders on the rest of the level, I might have gone over this earlier, but flat pieces like this with not much detail, it's okay to go ahead and put a mesh collider on, especially for an important piece of geometry like this curved floorway. You don't want to, put a box collider or a plane collider on that because it won't track the contours. So mesh colliders on some objects, just use your best judgment. Experiment, but for what I did, every part of the base environment I put mesh colliders on, and it didn't affect my performance too much. And I've kind of gone through my hierarchy a little bit. As you can see, I have a lot of stuff in here and a lot of duplicates. Is organization, organization, organization. It's very important. It's very easy to get lost in your room hierarchy here. So, I have the basic environments here. You can see selected. These are just all my hallway pieces. And for specialty rooms where I had to do some like custom scaling and whatnot, I made an empty game object to make sure that I'm organizing all those pieces, because they're regularly shaped. They're not part of any real prefab. I'm kind of just getting in there and wrestling around, scaling things, making them work. Alright, so that's great. So next thing I want to talk about is lighting. You'll notice that all of these lights I have placed, I have a little point light attached to them as well, and you saw how to do that in the previous tutorials, or if you haven't, then this is a quick little review. Basically, I made a prefab of the light, and it not only has the light mesh, but it has the point light that is attached with it. And you remember, don't forget about treating your range and whatnot. But right now, my lights don't seem to be illuminating my scene, do they? Well, when you're lighting your scene, what I like to do, and I'm going to do a quick little trick. If I go to Window, and I go to the Light Mapping window, I can actually go to the Scene filter, and if I click Lights right here, it brings up all my point lights right here. Alright. Maybe another way to do it, let's see if this works. If I go to my Props Prefab, let me get rid of that window. Oops, maximized. I'm going to go and find my light prefab, and there's my point light. Alright, yeah, for my point light, you'll notice that I have the lights turned off right now. I want to indicate a purpose here. So we have two things to do to get these lights showing up and not just like the default field lighting that Unity gives us. First of all, we have this little light toggles in-game light or not. So if I turn it off, you'll notice this is kind of how it, the scene might have looked at the very beginning. You put a prop in, it's not very illuminated. It's pretty dark in here. So you can toggle default lighting on and off here. But also, if I have my prefab point light selected, this is a nice thing about prefabs. It goes to all these lights I have filtered in my light mapping window a second ago. I'll go over that in more detail in a second. But I can just click on my light. This little box right here illuminates them by default. Alright. Well, I guess in the future it doesn't affect the lights that are already in the scene. So be careful about that. So in your prefab, you can only select things that are about to go into your scene. So if I pop this light prefab in there, then you'll notice that this light actually is working the way it should be, because in the prefab I have the light turned on there. But in a case like this, where I have all these lights in and I have them turned off because I've already baked the lights, again I'm going to bring up my light mapping, and let's minimize that a little bit. Made this window really big. Gotta love windows. Well, I'm just going to filter this, and I'll go over the light mapping window in 1 second, but I'm just going to get back to a good point here. I've got all my lights selected in my hierarchy, just my hierarchy, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn them on. So when you're lighting your scene, you want to make sure that you use the real scenes lighting. See the difference here? Now with all my lights on, I can get a real sense for the ambiance of my game level now. And light placement, think about it logically. Think about what kind of dynamic shadows you might be casting here and there. And another thing that you might want to do is, even though this is the Unity free version, it doesn't have real-time shadows. But if you go into your settings here and click soft shadows, you'll notice you get these warnings. But clicking light, going to the shadow type and doing soft shadows, they will show up in your light bake. Alright, so you got a good preview of what your lights are doing, because you make sure they're checked on. You got your colors and your intensities, and everything's going good. Notice that I have a kind of a blue tint because my lights are texture is blue. And so you're ready to go. I like this scene, but we want to get into some light baking. And you'll notice for this hallway, I plan on having going down the hallway and reaching this door being the final point of my level. So I wanted to kind of direct the user to go down to this ramp, so I've made this light really bright and all the ones leading up to it progressively dimmer until you get to this really bright spot. Lighting is a very good way to direct your players' attention to know where to go in a level. A good example of that is Left 4 Dead. I don't know if anybody's played it, but the reason why those levels aren't as as confusing as they are, next time you play a game, just check for the way they light it. Lighting's always a good example of where to lead your players on where to go next. So this room's really bright, so there must be something important in here, right? Because you can see things clearly. Objectives can clearly be illuminated. You want to kind of veer away from putting objectives in your levels in really dark places, because how's the player going to know to go and activate it or collect it? And this right here has just enough ambiance and mood to get that kind of spooky, this big, spacious room versus, being able to see what's actually going on. Alright, so now that you got your lights in place, you need to do a few things. So let's collapse my meshes layer here. And light baking is the method of computing all the light sources in your scene, and everywhere there's light cast, it basically takes that lighting information and shadow information, converts it into like a texture map that you might have applied to these materials. A 2D monochromatic, or in this case there's blue light here, so there'll be blue lights going on, and it just makes a texture map, and it applies it. It's almost like a texture overlaid over every single mesh in your room. So before you can even do a light bake, you need to make sure of one thing. You need to go to your meshes folder and you need to make sure they're marked as static objects. Light baking will only affect static objects. So if you get to this point and you figure out, okay, well, nothing's static, I've checked my meshes, and the easiest way to do this is just to select the root folder with all your meshes in it. Notice how everything's selected in my scene. You're going to go over here in your inspector, click static. It's going to ask, do you want to change children? Basically, children are everything underneath this group. All the groups, all the meshes, everything. Yes, let's change everything. Now every single object is marked static inside of our scene, because basically we're just laying out all the static pieces of our level right now. The core, static, non-moving pieces of geometry and lights and all that good stuff. So everything's checked with static. Now let's bring up our light mapping window. We do that by going to Window, Light Mapping. And you saw me using this earlier before to kind of filter out some of the things to get quick access to all the point lights in my scene. But selecting all, you don't give me any options. If you ever want to go in, and I recommend doing this, selecting all the lights in your scene here, you can set your shadow samples to something like 3. That just gives you a little bit more fidelity on your shadows, makes them a little bit cleaner, a little bit more sharp, a little bit more defined. Higher numbers will increase your render time, so I suggest going really hard on that. 3 to 5 is about all I ever use. The next little window here is the bake option right here. I want to go back and select all because I'm kind of done messing with those lights. Don't worry about shadow radius, just leave that at default. And you can even change intensity and stuff here, but I imagine different lights will have different intensities. If you mess with this option, it'll change the intensity for all the lights you have selected, so you could accidentally reset all the different intensities you have in your scene. Watch out for that. So our bake tab right here is kind of where some of the magic happens. The free version is very limited in what kind of light baking you can do, but it's good enough for if you're just starting out in Unity. Dual mode, dual light maps versus single light maps. Basically, this is used for if you're far away, you know, it doesn't have as big and chunky a light map, so it kind of switches in a simpler, smaller light map and makes it a little bit easier on the engine. When you're up close to something, then it gradually fades into a more detailed light map. So it's just another tricky way that Unity optimizes your real-time frame rate. So, you know, dual light maps, always a good idea. Using forward rendering, don't worry about that. That's deferred and forward rendering are two things you'll only have to worry about in the Pro version. Quality is always set at the high. We always want some high. Ambient Occlusion is basically self-shadowing. So if I go into this room right here, you'll notice that in every room, if two objects are next to each other, say like in this corner here, this is kind of like not a good example, but let's look at this little crevice here where the ceiling meets the wall. When two objects are close to each other, they kind of self-shadow each other because they're occluding or blocking kind of light sources. So objects that are next to each other have this kind of natural, soft, subtle light shadowing going on. And ambient occlusion is the word for that. It makes games look pretty. It makes every scene look a little bit more believable. It adds a lot of flavor to your light. So I always like to use ambient occlusion. And this little check right here just dictates how strong or how thick or how opaque you want those shadows to be. You know, somewhere kind of, you know, in between 5 and 1 is where I usually like to put it. Max distance affects how far the ambient occlusion spreads out. By default, I like to kind of leave it at 0.1. If I don't like those results, I can go back and tweak that. But the bigger the number here, the longer the shadow is going to lay over the wall. But remember, this is really subtle technique, so we don't want the ambient occlusion to just go from this corner out down to like here and down to there. It's really garish and it can be distracting. So max distance, just kind of keep it at 0.1, see what it's doing. Contrast, again, kind of affects the values of those ambient occluded lights. LOD surface, I never really mess with that. The last little setting is your resolution. This basically dictates how crisp your shadows are going to be. Are they going to be stair-steppy and blocky like you see in some games, or are they going to be nice, smooth, and well-defined? By default, it's 50. You can mess around with that, but I usually like taking mine up to 100. Alright, the next thing you're going to do is you're just going to click Bake Scene. And it's going to be about a 10 to 20 minute process depending on your computer. So, you know, make sure you got everything just right. And if you like it, you're good, and you like all the intensities and ranges on your lights, and you got everything placed. And remember, you need to finalize the final placement of all your meshes before you bake lights, because if you move something after you bake lights, you're going to have shadows that don't make sense, and I'll show you why in a second. So just so you don't have to watch me do a 20-minute render, I'm going to pretend like I just baked scene. When you do bake scene, you have a few options. You can just do some selected things or probes. That's really only a probe feature, so don't worry about probes. But baking scene just ensures that everything that's marked static in your scene gets baked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend like I just baked the whole scene. And let's go ahead and load up level 2. I want to make any changes there. So instantly you'll notice a few new things here. In my pipe room, I have some nice shadows coming off some objects. Notice how this light placement and the way I place this pipe creates some nice sweeping shadows that eventually get faded out by this light right here. This wall has all these shadows over here. And let me show you what I mean by moving objects away from the walls. Notice how if I move the barrels, those shadows are still stuck to the wall because that's a static texture. They don't move with the barrels. So make sure that you finalize your design there. And you'll notice, you know, a little bit more spooky cinematic environment here. That hard light in the center is coming in and, you know, giving some shadow, even catching some of the wire on this rubble here. And even we can see the papers emitting some shadows here. The ambient occlusion is coming in here, nice, and giving a nice gradation between different little objects there. The ambient occlusion around the rubble, you can see kind of a black defined line. That's that self-shadowing I was talking about. I might have upped my max distance a little bit in this scene. You'll notice how if you go in here, you can see that, yeah, whenever I look down this hallway, there's a big bright light leading me to, well, maybe I should go there because it's a little bit brighter there. Another little technique I've used at this point is I went to Edit, Render Settings, and I've actually added some fog to my scene. You'll notice in the background how it gets a little hazy. If I turn that off, everything comes a little bit more clear. Add a little bit of ambionic fog or ambience to the level by adding some fog. You notice the farther you get away, the heavier the fog becomes. That's just the nature of the way the fog works and how they got it programmed up in here. But with small, you know, tight spaces, the fog kind of adds a kind of old, kind of almost fakes like a dusty feeling in the air. Gives it just a little bit more of a spooky, abandoned vibe. Your ambient light can also be adjusted as well, and play around with these settings to get your fog just right. You know, obviously too dense, but maybe with a 0.05 setting, we get just the amount of fog that you might want, depending on how smoky you want your room. You can also mess with your ambient light, so you can naturally make things bright or dark. Since I've already got these lights baked, it doesn't do much. But if you go back in, if I go back into scene 1, I can show you what that. If I go to Edit, Render Settings, I can show you what this ambient light does. So this is pre-bake, and I can kind of control how dark and light the rooms are, but just by controlling my ambient color. And I can even give it kind of a bluish tint too, because all my lights in my scene are blue. So I'm kind of living in this dark blue area. So if you really want your place lit up nice, you can adjust it through the ambient light box right there. But you know, I want a little bit more atmosphere and whatnot. Yeah, so that's basically just how you bake the lights. If you don't like how they go, if you're just hating it, then I'm not going to do it because it might ruin all the light mapping I did. But if you want to make a few changes, like you want to increase that max distance on your ambient occlusion here, you can just go to Clear, and it will delete all the light maps in your scene. And your light maps are saved in the same folder or area as your levels are saved in your scenes. So you go to File, you save your scene, and in my scenes folder I have all these different variations, and these are my light maps right here. If I click on them, we can see that, yeah, they're just texture files. But Clear will delete all these, and you'll have to rebake from square one. So naturally I'm going to refrain from doing that. So I'm not going to save. So here are my my lit map, and everything is good to go. So let's see what I have in level 3 already. I'm going to just double click it. In level 3, it might just be the exact same, and maybe I've added a few things. But let's move on to particles real quick. In level 4, I've added some nice particle effects. And I'm going to go ahead and press play in my scene. I got my character controller ready to rock. So if I press play, this is what I'm looking at in my scene. So you'll notice in here, I got some nice fog going on. So that those lights are really bright because I got those. Oh, wait, somebody needs to put out this fire. So these are particle systems that I've installed in packages inside of Unity. So there's just kind of a fire I have going there. And go light on the particle systems, guys. Too much particles will cause you a lot of pain and suffering. And I have that barrel on fire right there. And I actually have these control panels sparking because, you know, they've been cut from the wall and they're just, you know, basically they've had it. To wrap this up real quick, I'm going to show you how you can manipulate some of these particle systems and how you can actually bring them in to the Unity package itself. So all I did to bring in some of these default particle systems, the sparks and the flames are something that are built into Unity if you import the package. I'm going to right click on assets and I'm going to go to import package right here. So right clicking on assets, import package, and we're going to click on those particles. Hopefully this doesn't ruin anything. And you'll get a box like this. I've already imported them. Everything's going to be checked, so just keep it. You're going to press import. But I've already imported them, so I'm going to get rid of that window. And then you're going to see in your standard assets, there's your character controller, some light flares and cookies I was playing around with. But there's your particles folder. And it has a whole, you know, myriad of choices here. So let's go to fire. And you'll notice that, you know, in my particle system here, I already have for my fire here. You notice I kind of have it nicely sized and it's right on top of the barrel. But if I just brought in flame randomly, look how big that flame is. That's huge for our scene, isn't it? So I guess all we gotta do is scale it down, right? Scale is not doing anything except maybe affecting the light source it comes with. So what's going on here? Why can't I scale this flame? Well, basically particles are independent of scaling in that every particle system has a range of settings here. And you'll notice you have a min size, max size. Guess what that's good for? Yeah, it's good for, let me get out of Skype real quick. It's good for setting the size of your particles. So, you know, some of these pre-built ones, they'll have particles that are multi-tiered. You know, there's an inner core and outer core. I'm going to go over here and just uncheck this ellipsoid particle emitter. That way it's not bothering me. And now I can just focus on this base one right here. So playing around with your basic sizes here, as well as how much energy they have, about how fast they emit, and even going down to the ellipsoid right here, making this something like 0.1, 0.1 will noticeably decrease the size of the base of my particle here. I'm not going to show you every single value what this does. Half the fun of playing with particle systems are just messing around with the settings. So I got the outer core smaller. I'm going to go back to my inner core and let's go ahead and activate it. You'll notice that, wow, that's still way too big compared to how I've kind of tweaked this bottom one. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go down here and do 0.05, 0.05, 0.05. And the ellipsoid. Ellipsoid is the shape of the particle that it's emitting. I also need to go in here and change the size of the actual particle textures that are being emitted. So I can do a 0.1, 0.1. Maybe that's a little too small. So maybe let's try 0.5. And my min size can be like maybe 0.4. And my max size, so we can get a little variation, is 0.9. So now my flame is a little bit smaller than it was before. And then you have the flame maybe going above the ceiling. And that's just some more settings you'll have to mess with. I think for me it was the local velocity here. If I change that to 0.5, then noticeably shorter flame here, right? Outer core. You want the outer core to be at the base because that's the way they designed this up. So the local velocity, let's change that to 0.3. And let's look at what we have with the whole flame going on. There we go. Maybe I need to change that up to 0.5 now. And you can even change the position. So every particle emitter, you know, it's a multi-tiered one. So you can change the position. You know, I can even separate them if I wanted to. And if I select the root flame, we'll have both of them going at the same time. Obviously that looks stupid. So let's put it back where it was. So to check your final work, we've now increased the size of that flame just to be a little bit smaller. Not by scaling it, but by tweaking some of these nice particle settings here. And I did the same thing with the sparks here. Originally the sparks were huge, but I had to go in and tweak them and tweak them and tweak them till I got them to the right size. So if I press play again, let's walk to that room where all the magic happens. You notice I have like this little precious little fire here, and then I got my barrel fire. And originally the sparks were huge, and they were like going all the way over to the room. So I had to adjust their lifespan, the particle size, even the direction of the whole particle system to make sure they were emitting in the right direction. So I hope this gave you a little bit of insight on some pitfalls you could fall into and some tips on how you can build your level. And don't forget to add light sources for some of the more complex particle systems you have going on. And if you have the foresight, if you know you're going to have your fire there, you can even put a orange point light. Let me go and unplay this. You can put an orange point light here that's not included with the particle system. It's just something you put on your own. You can even bake that orange glow into your light baking. But right now I have that as a real-time light. There might be a few questions left unanswered after this video, but those are questions I want you to be able to go in and get your hands dirty and answer yourself. So it's just kind of a preview. I've shown you some tricks. I've shown you how to add some fog, what objects need what kind of colliders, some tricks you can do with the limited resources of props, and I want to see some really cool levels from everybody. Enjoy the lesson, and from here we'll get into all the scripting of player locations, adding maybe a barrel that falls off that stack in the back of the large room here. I'm going to hold right click. Maybe I'll have a barrel that just tips and kind of rolls, so we can have a random barrel. It won't have any shadows because Unity Free doesn't support real time, but we'll look past that. We'll get over it, and then we'll get into the ammo crate pickups and how we can get the locator up here to signify when you've picked up a nice ammo crate, and we'll place these randomly. And then I think after that we just got to pick a area in the map in which we can go in and finish the leveling, and for me it's walking into this door right here. Alright, thanks for listening, guys.